Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Dorothy O'Byrne from the CCMA welcoming you to our very special event to mark International Women's Day. We know we're probably a day or two behind all the original celebrations on Monday, but we thought it was good to give people time to, go and be involved in a lot of the webinars taking place on Monday, take a breath and have Wednesday to be joined by this great panel of industry experts who have given freely of their time this morning, and we so much appreciate it, to talk about the theme this year, which is Choose to Challenge. We're going to give a minute or two just for everybody to join. So I'm just going to briefly introduce who's on screen. For those of you regulars to our webinars, you'll all recognise Neve from WSI, who support all the technology on the webinars, who we wouldn't be able to manage without. Fiona Buckley is our MC. I'm delighted to be joined by Fiona again. And I was just thinking earlier this morning, this time last year, we were all set for this event in BHI, and unfortunately, it was the first thing, and the last thing we've had to cancel. So not that we all thought we'd be sitting here a year later, but those are the times we are in. But absolutely delighted that some of the original panelists are with us today, Gillian and Ruth, and obviously delighted to be joined by Aoife and John. So just to remind everybody, we will be recording this session. We do really want to make it as interactive as possible. We have a couple of talking points that Fiona is going to guide the conversation, but do put up any questions, comments, observations, and we'd be delighted for you to do that and really use the opportunity to get some great advice from the experts here in front of you. So I'm going to hand over to you, to our MC for the morning, Fiona, and thanks again to everybody, and enjoy.
Thank you, Dorothy. Really looking forward to this discussion today, and we've lots of different topics that we're going to mention. So if you have questions, as Dorothy said, feel free to put them into the chat box now and any time, and we're going to get to them towards the end. So as you're thinking of them, pop them in. If you'd like to direct this specific question to any particular panel members, so Aoife, John, Gillian or Ruth, please put in the chat box their name first and then the actual question. If it's not for anyone in particular and you wouldn't mind who it's asked to, then you can just leave out the name, but we will come to them towards the end. So there's been an awful lot of stuff going on in the last 12 months, and I think I'd really like to begin the session today by asking everybody how they have really dealt with the last 12 months and the challenges it's thrown up. What might have been your specific lessons learned, or indeed your key strength that you've tapped into to survive and thrive, I suppose, over the last 12 months. And Gillian, I'd love to come to you first.
Oh, I don't know if I always like talking about challenges. I'm a person who talks about opportunities, but I suppose in terms of the specific circumstances, about 2 years ago, I retired from the corporate world and moved to run the 30% Club. So on the first day of lockdown, I thought, I'm going to be fine. I have no office. Great remote worker. I have been talking about remote working and agile working for years because I'm really passionate about it. And I discovered on day one, I knew nothing about Zoom. I had never heard of Blue Jeans, and the idea of turning my camera on in my kitchen was just terrifying because I had lived either going to visit people or on the phone. So that was probably the first thing that I had to get used to. But actually, in terms of challenges and thinking about the people in the audience, I had spent quite a number of years talking to companies about the great benefits of agile working and how it would fit with the diversity agenda. And it did amaze me the first couple of weeks, companies who had said no, ringing me going, Gillian, how can I put in an agile policy in 24 hours? And it doesn't have to be perfect and it doesn't have to be negotiated. Just tell me how to do it quickly. And for me, it was a great opportunity, but it was a huge challenge for them, particularly companies, probably some of them in the audience here today who had thought it wasn't possible, or let's spend 3 years trialing a pilot and now all of a sudden let's do it in 3 hours. So that is my memory of this week 52 weeks ago.
Wow, it's just mad, isn't it? Ruth, I might come to you again, just to the question, in terms of yourself, what were the key challenges, the lessons learned and the strengths you might have tapped into in the last 12 months?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, 2020 was really hard. I think it was a tough year for everybody and for different reasons. And I started working from home, indeed started working from home on March 5th. So we've been working from home a year now. And at the start, I had a lot of anxiety about doing that and managing that with regards to operationally. You know what I mean? I hadn't managed a team like that. My team hadn't worked from home. And I think we needed to dig deep and really support each other. And what I've been particularly impressed by is the resilience that I've seen with my team and the support that they've shown each other and how connected they've stayed. And everybody has made a particular effort to kind of ensure that they support each other and stay connected. Our mission at Indeed is we help people get jobs. And our clients, a lot of them were going into lockdown and didn't need to hire new staff. So a lot of our business disappeared overnight. We still had to remain empathetic to our clients and support them, and support the clients in things like healthcare, where they were looking to recruit. So the things I learned was that we're a lot more resilient than we realize. Empathy is so important to your clients, to your teams, and to yourself. And that's something that, you know, I really want to take forward into the coming years.
Yeah, I think compassionate empathy is a big thing at the moment. So compassionate empathy is all about action empathy. So how can we really jump into those shoes of people and give back and resonate and accommodate where we can? Thank you for that. John, same question. Any lessons learned or key strengths that you tap into?
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, look, I think as Ruth says, anyone who said it wasn't a bloody hard 12 months is not really living in the world we're in. So I think everyone should acknowledge that and in their own life. I think for me, the biggest challenge was that the normal delineations in terms of work, home, family, all went and everything became one. So, you know, your home was your workplace, you know, your workplace was your home, you know, you're talking to your employees while your children were on in the same room as you, whatever the case may be. So for me, I think initially that was the most immediate challenge, and how you manage that and how you made sure you progressed all those agendas. From a work perspective, I guess it's 12 months ago this weekend, actually, we were locked in our contact centers for 48 hours trying to understand how we're going to deal with, you know, our customers and the challenges they were going to face. So not alone did AIB have challenges itself, but our customers had huge challenges, and how we actually faced out to them and sort of managed their interactions when, you know, buildings were being shut down, etc. So that was a real logistical challenge. I think a bit like Gillian, in my DNA, I'm probably more optimistic than sort of pessimistic. So, you know, I think while the 12 months has been extremely challenging, it has brought huge opportunities. It has progressed certain agendas more in 12 months than it would have normally taken maybe years. I think about maybe, as Gillian pointed out, agile working, the use of technology in businesses. It also provided certainly AIB with an opportunity to connect with our customers at a real time of need, and, you know, live up to our values in that regard. You know, standing by our customers in the partnership. It provided us opportunities in that regard. And then, you know, I think one of the big challenges, and I'm sure we'll touch on it later in the conversation, is just that connectivity from a team perspective, from a people perspective. You know, I reflect on my own network. There's people I see every day that I just don't see anymore, you know, so, you know, how do you manage that and how do you move that forward? So I think they've been my reflections on 12 months.
Thank you, John. And Aoife, same question.
Yeah, thanks a million, and very similar to lots of the panelists here as well. My abiding memory of the start of the pandemic and the lockdown, if you want to call it that, is similar to John. I manage all the contact centres for Bank of Ireland. We had zero capability for working from home, so we had 2 buildings in the main with about 500 people in each. So talk about not fit for purpose in relation to social distancing, etc. And all at a time when obviously our customers needed us, like John was mentioning, more than ever. So we had more calls than we had ever had before, because obviously people were concerned about stuff, and we had to set ourselves up to actually work remotely. So that was a huge challenge in itself. We ended up spreading ourselves out over 10 or 11 buildings, believe it or not, in the first instance, while we stood up the working from home capability. But we managed to get there, and just like John, I actually see that as a huge opportunity, because it was a discussion point for a long time. It was something we wanted to do. Colleagues were asking for it, but it was kind of going to take, you know, probably 6 years, and yet we managed to do it in 6 months. So it was great from that perspective. From a personal point of view, I have to say the biggest learnings obviously for me are that resilience piece. It's kind of dealing with people in a completely different way than we've ever dealt with them before, including myself. I love the face-to-face. I'm a very sociable person, love having the cup of coffee and the chats with people. And certainly in a contact centre environment, walking out on the floor and being able to just have a chat with people has been extremely challenging for me, but also I know for our colleagues. So they're probably the main things for me.
Yeah, and I think our personalities, really have dictated how well we have adapted, or thrived at home. I know extroverts are really kind of starting to retreat in a bit on their own personality at the moment because they're so used to that kind of sociability in terms of that. And on that trend, we're kind of going into the next question. And Ruth, I'm going to come to you first with the next question. Professional isolation, career isolation, feelings of invisibility, these are the really top challenges that we're experiencing in 2021. They were there in 2020, but now the longer this is going on, the harder it's really getting. And after about 12 months, the way I say this is relationships went on ice last year. Now the ice is melting. And after about 12 months, studies show in business terms, if we haven't physically met someone that we know quite well, that relationship needs a serious injection of, a proper relationship management and nurturing. But that's coupled with all this isolation feelings and things like that. What have you seen in terms of your organisation helping people in this regard about that isolation piece? And, professional isolation and career isolation, they're actually two different things, aren't they? Professional isolation is missing more the team camaraderie, the banter, the crack, the lunches, the Friday beers, all that stuff, where career isolation makes us feel our career has become a bit stagnant because of the situation. So Ruth, is there anything Indeed have done that you're able to kind of share, or even your thoughts on those kind of topics?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question, and it's something that we need to talk about. And I love the way that you've kind of segmented it into this professional isolation and career isolation. And I think it's only something that we've really understood and learned over the past year. And Aoife said something a minute ago that really resonated with me. I'm a face-to-face person. I love meeting people in person. I really feel that's where I connect strongly with people. I lead a sales org, probably mostly extroverts. So, this sort of working from home and isolation is tough on us. So we've done a lot around, and from the start, around the professional side of things. So keeping teams connected, keeping the org connected. So whether that be, team coffee mornings or social events on Zoom, that kind of started quite quickly and got established quite well. I think there is an element of Zoom fatigue. I know that, not all of us want to do Zoom quizzes or extra Zoom calls after we've been had a busy day, but there was a lot of that going on. I think the career isolation piece has really only become something that people are talking about very recently. And I think it's fundamentally impacting women as well. We know the reality of the pandemic, for many working women is they've been juggling that home schooling potentially for a lot of them, the caring for a lot of them. It has still fallen to women in a lot of the instances. And they are finding that impacting on their visibility or their ability to show up and turn up and put in the extra work that maybe some of their male colleagues can do. So what we've been looking at specifically within Indeed is kind of breaking it up into smaller groups and looking at women in particular. And the statistics around women between 23 and 33 are 30% less confident than their male peers. So it's been a real focus of kind of building up the confidence in that group by doing smaller sessions. So I have a women at growth in my org, and we have a book club we're reading, The Fix by Michelle King. If anybody follows her on LinkedIn, she's absolutely incredible about gender equality. But I think it is something that you need to be very intentional about. And I think women, it can be harder for us. So I think, as a leader, it's certainly the onus is on me, the onus is on my peers and my colleagues in senior leadership to focus on those women and kind of give them the support, structured mentoring, allyship, sponsorship. These are all the things that we're talking about at the moment to help support women.
Yeah, and it's funny, Ruth, because you're saying that, women need all this stuff, mentoring, further education, development, and a lot of people have come back and said they just don't have time over the last 12 months because they might be, managing all these things that are going on in the organization as well. I actually did my thesis on professional isolation for virtual workers a couple of years ago, and two of the proven academic things are mentoring and further education and development are proven to minimize that in that setting. But again, you got that time and that boundaries thing that's happening at the moment in terms of that. John, I might come to you next, same question. It can be about what you've seen or your thoughts and opinions around this isolation piece or feelings of invisibility. Anything that AIB have done or just your own personal thoughts?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is great to talk about it. It's the first area because, creating the space and bring it to attention is obviously, you know, a first step in the right direction. I would have thought, you know, my own perspective of a large network in AIB, you know, was pretty well connected right across the organisation. I think just to share my own perspective, what's happened over the last years, you become very focused on the here and now, the project in question, the topic, the task, and as a result, you know, you narrow your sphere of influence. I think from an AIB perspective, there's a lot of work from a leadership perspective in trying to facilitate and make time and space for teams to get together. I know that we talk about Zoom fatigue, but, you know, not to have a work objective, but just create space and time to get together, talk about things, how are you getting on? You know, there's been a lot of focus on well-being, which is a real anchor for this, I think. So, you know, from a mental health perspective, from a physical health perspective, creating the space and time as a group to talk about that and making sure there's a balance in that regard has provided opportunities for the team to bond and gel. You know, things like, you know, walking challenges, you know, 5K, etc. And you know, one things from COVID, I think, is that people have become more focused on mental health, their own physical well-being, and actually a lot of people have made great progress in that regard. So, you know, there is a hook there in terms of building a network internally in your organization in that regard. I think from a mentoring perspective, that really resonates with me. So when you talk about, you know, your connectivity and your networking from a professional perspective, I think mentoring has a key role. And I know in AIB we've placed a lot of attention on a Mentor Her program, which, you know, we have a focus to make sure that, you know, female talent in the organization is coming up through the ranks and that we've got succession planning at all levels and people have the opportunity to network and build those pieces. So, you know, the launch for 2021 in that regard was this morning. So there's a real opportunity there, and not just mentor-mentee relationships, but mentor relationships and mentee networks. So using that as a vehicle to branch out at both a mentoring level and a mentee level and build that network in the organization. So that's working really well for AIB. Something we've built on, I'm sure Gillian remembers it, something we've built on over the last number of years very successfully. And, you know, from a mentee perspective, the positivity and the outcomes are really, really strong. So, you know, that's a real success factor for us.
Yeah, the mentoring is where it's at. And Gillian, I'm definitely going to come to you next because I know you're a huge advocate of mentoring, especially with all the fantastic work that's been done in the 30% Club around this.
Yeah, I am. We're really big believers. At this stage, we have more than 1,200 people who have been through our mentoring program, and the other organizations on the call today have been great supporters. But actually, as I was listening to everybody else's conversation, there's probably two things that have struck me that we've been talking a little bit about in the 30% Club in the last 12 months. And the first is around how people network and interact. And one of the things that we see very clearly, women tend to be more comfortable networking with purpose. And that was the same before the pandemic, and it still is. Men, on the other hand, have a very strong overlap. And this is using stereotypes, and apologies to John if we use stereotypes here. Men tend to have a very strong overlap between their business network and their social network, and they use social activities to network. So both genders have actually been struggling in this space, you know, because for men, where they normally did their business networking through social activities, that's now gone, and women have to think even more about networking with purpose. So what we've tried to do across some of our events is build the networking into something for business, because everybody, yeah, the first week we did gin and tonics on Friday on Zoom, it was so exciting. By now we've had enough. So we've tried to build it in. So when we have events, we find good opportunities for small breakouts in 2s or 3s, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes interspersed across an activity. And also in the beginning, we noticed that all our industries were saying, women are less likely to turn cameras on, women are less likely to get involved. So some of our masterclasses have been specifically around how do I build my presence in a virtual world? And the very first thing is turn your camera on. But the second thing is about the role of leaders. And when I used to talk about agile working before, there was the confusion about agile and remote. Remote working, your technology works from home, but that's not agile. And that's what we've done in the pandemic. We have done that proof of concept, but agile working is really about agile technology, agile processes, and agile leadership. And I think what this has shown through the pandemic, that really good leaders have worked out how to help create better situations for people to be more confident and get involved. My boss can't give me confidence. It has to come from myself, but they can change the infrastructure. They can change the situation to help me be more confident. And we've seen really great leaders come to the fore in the last 12 months because they are so inclusive and they do this authentically. And that's where visibility, both personal and professional, can make a difference. So, you know, two slightly different perspectives, but, you know, really an issue and an opportunity in the last 12 months.
Some really good tips there. Thank you, Gillian. And Aoife, I'll come last to that question. So again, it's around the career isolation, invisibility, professional isolation. Any thoughts on that, Aoife?
Yeah, and actually just a slightly different angle. I'm interested, it very much resonates with me, that kind of networking with purpose that Gillian has just mentioned. So if I think about my own career over the last number of years in the bank, you know, someone saying to me, you know, we should have a coffee with so-and-so, used to set me over the edge, because you have two people sitting looking at each other and you're kind of having a coffee, and you know, it really used to stress me out. Whereas I much prefer, and I give this advice to people all the time, is look, if you're really interested in working in this area, or that's a team that really interests you, why don't you see if you can get involved in some initiative that they're doing? And that is much more purposeful, and actually they get to see a little bit of what you can do as well. And just another observation that I've noticed with a lot of colleagues in my business is that, believe it or not, and I take your point about the camera on and camera off, Gillian, but we have got some feedback from colleagues who said they're actually starting to speak out a lot more than they ever did before, contribute more, participate more. And it is because their camera's off. I know that sounds funny, and it's kind of, you know, I'd love to see people like that as well. They're actually more comfortable. They feel a little bit more anonymous, if you want to call it that, and we're actually seeing colleagues that are very comfortable. So we always say, look, turn your camera on if you'd like. If you're not comfortable, that's fine too. But I also think meetings and you know, opportunities to present have got a lot more. I suppose you miss the hi, how you doing, the kind of build a little bit of rapport, but in a way there's some opportunities to that as well, because it's not about, you know, who's talking about the match or knowing necessarily about things that you're not comfortable about. It's kind of coming in, doing your presentation and getting your message across, and actually a lot of people are thriving in that environment as well. So look, it takes all sorts, it's different for people, but there's some opportunities that I've seen kind of come out of the virtual way that we're all engaging as well.
Yeah, and I think it's worthwhile remembering that everyone is wired differently, isn't it? It's not a one size fits all. So while some people love the gin and tonic, some people would actually prefer not to have that engagement and just do their own thing. And I think we have to remember that it's not just work as well with this isolation, it's your family, it's your friends, and they anchor us. They're a part of who we are as well. And I think a lot of people have retreated back from getting in touch with all sorts of people at the moment. So I think it's the home life, personal life, just as much as the work life when we're talking about isolation. Let's park the 12 months for now, right? And let's look way back to the start of our careers. What I'd like to ask us next, and John, I'm going to come to you first, is any particular challenges you faced in your career at any stage? Is there anything that stands out to you, one particular milestone or one particular time that you looked back and said, okay, there was a challenge and this is how I overcome it? So it's like as if we're trying to give advice to people that might be out there now going through specific challenges. And I'm sure you've all had milestones in your career where you did hit particular challenges. It could have been a mentor that helped you. It could have been just something that really happened in your career. Any particular things you'd like to share on that, John?
Yeah, I guess, look, I always reflect as to, you know, what challenges I faced in my career. I suppose the biggest one for me was at the time of the financial crisis, 2008-9, when, look, well publicized the journey AIB has been on since then and what happened at that time. But, you know, as a sort of middle management team member at that stage, senior management in AIB was changing. And an opportunity presented itself to work in the office of the MD to manage their office. So I'll never forget the day. It's burnt into my memory. Being told the MD wanted to see me, you know, come upstairs. You know, and an hour later, I had a role working in the office of the MD. And I guess, you know, all kinds of things going through my mind in terms of imposter syndrome. Can I step up to this role? You know, it's a challenging time for the bank, never mind myself. And, you know, it was a time of, you know, immense stress. Young family at home, you know, Tara working as well. How was I going to juggle all of these competing priorities at that time? So, you know, for me, it was an opportunity, it was a challenge, and I always reflect on it, how happy I am that I took that challenge, put in the hard yards, to work at that time. We spoke at the start about, seeing a challenge as an opportunity, grasping that opportunity and trying to work through it. And on reflection, that has really stood to me in my career, taking that opportunity in terms of seeing how things work at a challenging time. And I think, what people should reflect at the moment is that during this pandemic, it's probably put everyone to the pin of their collar. They have come through it. They've learned an awful lot. And now they should start reflecting on how they can maybe take those learnings from this challenging time and apply them going forward. Take the things that have worked really well, take the things they've learned about themselves, become self-aware about those, see how you develop areas that need improvement, but also really tap into those strengths that you've tapped into over the last 12 months and apply them as you go forward. So, on reflection, for me, that was a seminal moment in my career. It shaped where I am today, it shaped who I am today, it shaped my leadership style. On reflection, that challenge for me presented a real opportunity. I'm delighted I took it. And I think, the learnings we're taking right now should help us again moving forward, so that'll be the big one for me, burnt into my memory.
It sounds like it was the right thing, isn't it? Aoife, I might come to the same, same question. Any particular challenge that stuck out to you and how you overcame it?
Yeah, and look, I'm nearly 30 years working in the same organisation, so I can think of lots, but I think the one that really stands out for me, and one I kind of, look out for all the time with colleagues, etc., is I'm going to call it kind of my first step into a management role. It is many years ago, I'll be honest, and we certainly didn't talk about things like inclusion or diversity or anything like that at that stage. But I suppose I was kind of at this assistant manager level for quite some time. I had just returned from maternity leave, and there was an opportunity to apply for a branch manager role at the time, and I hadn't even considered it. The interesting bit to this story is my husband, who used to work in the same organisation, was applying for the role, and it was a colleague that said to me at the time, "Are you not applying for that?" And I said, "God, no, I'm only back from maternity leave, and there's no way I'd be able to manage that," and all the rest. And this person, I suppose, coached me into submitting an application for the job. I actually got that job, which was interesting in itself at home for a while, but it was fine. And I suppose then I really started to see challenges, because I was the only female manager amongst 26 colleagues who were all male. And that was a very, very interesting time. I would say definitely a turning point in my career as well, because I really had to learn how to navigate that. And as I said, we now talk about advocates for females, etc. And there was a couple of them in there, thankfully, who I would say absolutely looked after me, but not in any formal way. And I suppose, look, some of those things have really stuck with me as I've become a leader myself. So I look out for females in particular who've come back from maternity leave, no matter what stage they are at their career. There can sometimes just be a confidence issue, which I'm very mindful for. And then we introduce things like RISE programs for females that, really give females the confidence to actually take the next step and know what you're capable of, etc. And I suppose we've introduced some really good initiatives off the back of that. But I certainly remember that time in my career, and it was challenging, but a great learning curve as well.
And it's great that you can depart that wisdom, Aoife, now that you have earned and learned those stories throughout. And, you're very fortunate there's a lot more support systems in place now, Absolutely. But they weren't 10, 20 years ago. Gillian, same question. Anything that's particularly standing out for you as in terms of a challenge you encountered?
Oh, when you go third, you're listening to other people's examples and go, what will I say? I had to put my CV together for a project I was working on recently, and looking back, it struck me that it was a lifetime of projects and challenges and roller coaster excitement, from career projects, salary projects, sad times running an exit program. When John was talking about that fateful day when life changed, I wrote the script for the retiring MD as he spoke to 10,000 people to say he wasn't sure would we all have a job tomorrow, and he read my script word for word, and it was a very challenging day. But when I look back, when I started in financial services in 1979, when I went into the organisation, 56% of the industry were female. There wasn't one female senior manager, never mind one female senior executive, because up until 3 years before that, there was a marriage bar. So women had to leave once they got married. So my whole career was built on a situation of no role models. And even up to 10, 15 years ago, there was an idea that as a senior woman, you were single, or you had no kids, or you had a house husband. And I had a husband with an equally successful career, you know, and we both wanted to build our careers and raise our 2 kids without screwing up their lives. And they're both in their 30s, and I'm glad to say we managed to do that. You know, so for me, the moments were always about, I don't have a role model, so can I be a role model? And, you know, the day I retired from my last job, the best parts of the day were young women coming up to me going, I could see me in your life. I could see that I could do this. I could see that I could move on. And what I always tried to do, I never worried about moving upwards. I always worried about moving to a next job that I would enjoy and get some benefit out of, which ultimately did bring me up to a very senior role, which I enjoyed. But the best bit of advice I got along the way, I was going to move in working for the CEO and the leadership team. And my boss, who had recommended me, he said, I'm recommending you because no matter how hard things get, you always stay true to yourself, you know, and sometimes it's hard to do the right thing, but you always do. And you cannot change when you move to this 4th floor, because lots of people change, but you can't, and I don't want you to. And I kind of took that, and, you know, over the next couple of years, as I was looking at bringing in things that were tough, people think HR is one of those lovely, fluffy jobs that you do because, you know, you like people. HR is really tough. You know, you have to make hard decisions for people and for organizations. But I always kept that in my mind. I had to be the role model. I had to be true to myself. And I had to do jobs that I would enjoy. And that's what I've learned. Looking back, I didn't see them as challenges then. They were just the way life is. And for people going through it now, they're going, this is just the way life is. But actually, on reflection, you can see how things can change.
Absolutely. Ruth, same question.
So if Gillian thought it was hard going third, particularly hard going fourth. Yeah, I've enjoyed all the stories that everybody has kind of talked about. And I'm going to pick up a little bit on part of kind of Aoife's story and something, excuse me, that John mentioned as well. And I'm going to go back to one of my first roles and an opportunity I had to go for a promotion. And I went for it, but I didn't actually think that I was going to get it because I didn't have the confidence. I had the competence, but I didn't have the confidence. And as I mentioned, you know, there is now statistics around the fact that, you know, 23 to 33-year-old women are 30% less confident than men, but I didn't know that at the time. So I went in to interview for the role, didn't get the role, and my male colleague got the role. And I looked at him and I was like, there's absolutely no reason why I shouldn't have gotten that role. And I had an incredible female role model at the time who subsequently became my mentor. And she worked with me, and she was one of those people that Gillian has been to many people throughout her career, and I'm sure Aoife as well. She really put the time in with me and she mentored me. And what I was experiencing was imposter syndrome, but I didn't really know the name for it at the time. And I think, you know, thankfully we're talking about it a lot more now. And the next time I was very fortunate, 6 months later, there was an opportunity to go for a promotion, and I went for it and I got it. And that was my first step into management. And I was 6 months behind my male peer, but I could have been 2 years behind him. It's just I was lucky the opportunity came up quickly for me. And I think what's really key is we've moved from there to, in 2019, I was one of the keynote speakers at Women in Tech, talking about imposter syndrome and the fact that it affects men and women, but women are just, you know, more likely to talk about it and to really impact them. So I love the fact that we've moved on and we're really openly talking about it. And the next part of this conversation is, you know, people talking about that men's confidence in a role 6 months after they get it is increases, women's decreases, because they don't have the support within the organization. And we're changing that. But there's a whole part now around imposter syndrome is actually based on the fact that many workplaces still don't have gender balance and there's still massive gender inequality. So that's what I'm excited about, is those conversations are happening. and we're looking at that. So that challenge for me was a really good one at that start of my career, because it really made me think about how I was navigating myself in the workplace.
Yeah, and I think the whole imposter syndrome has taken a real increase since we've worked from home as well. There's a lot of studies now showing that when we're on our own, working from home, we're in our heads a lot more, we're self-reflecting a lot more, we're reading into things happening in meetings that aren't actually happening, and we're back on that fictional journey. And I'm seeing a lot more of that imposter syndrome rearing its ugly head at the moment in terms of that. Thank you for those. And just a reminder for people, if they have any questions, to keep putting them through the chat box, and we will get to them shortly. I wanted to talk about something that actually, Aoife, you picked up on a couple of moments ago. So I'm going to come to you first. According to recent research, there was a McKinsey report in 2019. The biggest obstacle women face is that first step up to management. Do you agree with that? And also, what, if anything, has your organisation done to address that? So we might disagree with that, that's fine. That makes a great panel discussion if someone disagrees with it. But what do you think? What's your thoughts on that?
No, I suppose that was certainly my experience many years ago. I would like to think that we've got a lot better at it, and actually in our organisation, it's not necessarily what we see. So we definitely struggle much further up the line when you're kind of in your very senior female roles in particular. But having said that, I think the reason why we've seen really good improvements, you know, on taking that first step is because of exactly what we've put in place. We've kind of said, okay, this is an issue for us. We aren't seeing enough people taking the first step in the first place, having the confidence, all the stuff that we spoke about there. So there's one thing that I think is really important as well. When you start to put in programs, or even, you know, people can agree whether you should have targets or not targets and all that good stuff, but it needs to be really, you know, top down as well as bottom up. And why do I say that? Because I know my experience over the years is I did well depending on who my line manager was, right? So if I had a good line manager and they were promoting me and sponsoring me and pushing me forward for stuff and challenging me and all that good stuff, I did well. And I suppose I'm a long time in the organisation, and I've probably had good and bad, and there's a huge difference. So I think it's really, really important that as a group or at an organisation level, you start to take the control away from the line manager a little bit. So in other words, I don't have to be an individual in the organisation today and someone must put me forward for a mentorship program, or they must put me forward to do something. We've now done a really top down approach. So it's access for everybody, if that makes sense, into the same things as everybody else. So I think that's a really important step that we've taken in recent years versus like even 2 or 3 years ago. You had to be put forward for something. Your line manager had to think you were good if you were to get any opportunity to kind of avail of all the supports. So I think just that's a really, really important point, and I think organizations need to do more of that. Just open everything to everybody else. That would be the first thing I'd say. And then, of course, that does need to be, I'm not saying the line manager isn't important. Of course they are, because if you look at surveys and all the rest, you know, people think senior leaders in organizations are all sorts of different people, whether that's a team leader or right up to the CEO of the company. So I suppose that's a huge one for me. I think definitely things need to be more accessible. We've got very, very good at that. And we haven't apologized for probably doing an awful lot more around females, just because we feel the representation is lower. So we've done very, very pointed, dedicated programs for females to encourage them to kind of get to the next level, etc. That, I suppose, tied with the flexibility that we absolutely are showing now in relation to working hours. So, you know, you really can work what suits you now. That's something that in the past, the bank, I'll be honest, wasn't fantastic at. We were very kind of much based around our opening hours and all of that, but we've got much better at that as well. And I think all of those things, Fiona, have really, really helped, I suppose, give people the confidence to take the next step, or the first step, as it might be.
And it's interesting, Aoife, that you mentioned the relationship with the line manager, because I know from my interactions with lots of females out there, there's a lot of people struggling with that relationship with the line manager, and that they might feel that little bit trapped in terms of getting that next step when they don't have that endorsement with that line manager, and they're not confident to go up skip level to the next level. So it's about all those things. John, I might come to you next in terms of, you know, AIB, that perspective. Do you agree that that can be the difficult thing for the first step for females? And if so, yeah. Have they done? They'd be happy
I definitely agree. I think to touch on a point for me for there, I guess leadership is required from the top here. AIB has made good progress in this regard. You know, there's a report out last week that would say that of, I think, 3,500 financial services companies surveyed, AIB is in the top 10 with regard to equality at all levels, right from board, executive team, senior management, throughout the organisation. So that's a positive, but that's built on leadership. I guess the piece for me, that's top down. From the bottom up, you got to make sure that's not built on a house of cards. So, you know, where is the succession planning? Where are the, you know, the first sort of rung of the management ladder, and how are females progressing on that? There's a couple of things I say on that. I think the role of males is important here as well, and male leaders in the organisation. I recall having a conversation with a colleague, a financial services colleague, a lady in Iceland. I thought she framed it really well, you know, in terms of the male perspective on things. They like to talk about having the best male colleagues, the best husbands, the best, you know, brothers, you know, in their community to support this agenda, and it's really important. So I think when you put that perspective on it, you know, I think the male influence is important as well. From an AIB perspective, a lot of focus has gone into a Mentor Her program, which is effectively a program where junior female colleagues are brought into a dedicated program and a dedicated structured program for a year, partnering with a mentee, male or female, and having sort of a suite of activities over the course of the year to address exactly the issues we're talking about here. The thing that always strikes me when I meet, you know, a female mentee at the start is that confidence piece. So I think, Ruth, you touched on it. You look at the CV, you say, oh my God, this person has huge competence, huge experience. And then you meet them for the first time, and they haven't put together their story in terms of why they're right for the role, why they should get it. So on paper, it's fantastic. If it was a male colleague with the same competence, you get a very different story. So, you know, a starting point for me is, can you articulate your story? Why, you know, look back on your past experiences, put that together, you know, talk with confidence about what you've been through and how you're going to apply it to the role in question. So I always find that striking, the difference from a female and a male perspective in that regard. So I think that's a starting point. I think from an AIB perspective, what we're seeing is real benefits of this program. As I said, these people, these sort of individuals are feeding through the management layers. And when you survey them a year after, you know, they've been through the program, the results are astounding in terms of, you know, that confidence being up. They've improved their network. You know, they have their story straight, and, you know, they're willing now to sort of, you know, push forwards and progress their careers and think proactively about those steps and where they want to get to. So I think that Mentor Her program from an AIB perspective has proved to be a real success, and we're seeing year-on-year increases in the number of people who want to partake in it.
Yeah, it's fantastic, John. It's a great initiative. And I love what you say about the story piece. I'm always encouraging people to write their own narrative and tell their story. And women are fantastic storytellers. Once we're given the opportunity, we can tell our story, and we put loads into it. Our passion is there and everything. So I think that's a really good piece of advice. Ruth, I'm going to come to you next for that question. So about the first step on the ladder, do you agree? And what have Indeed done to support that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And some great insight from both Aoife and John there. So I've always been in sales, and sales traditionally is male dominated. I don't know why. Sales is incredible. It's creative and it's problem solving and it's fun. And I'm now in a tech company, which again, traditionally can be male dominated. So Indeed is doing a lot of work really with our IRGs, inclusion resource groups, and we have a number of them that represent traditionally underrepresented populations in the workforce. But we have a very strong Women at Indeed IRG group, and these are employee-led, but they're funded, and they have a focus, they have an objective, and they have SLT support. And they do a lot of work around mentorship. And I'm not going to spend too much time on that because I think both Aoife and John have talked really well about mentorship programs. But you know, we have those as well. We identify women who are going to take that next step, or we want to take that next step into their first management role. But what we're starting to talk a lot more about is something that John mentioned briefly, was about allyship, and also how that leads into sponsorship. So Women at Indeed is about obviously gender equality, and we need our male allies to be a part of that conversation and to be a part of that solution. And many of them want to be, and it's about helping them understand what they can do to support. They can be very small things. So we talk about women in meetings. Traditionally, if you're the only woman in a meeting, you're some incredible percent that I can't think of less likely to speak up. If there's 2 women in a meeting, it increases the percentage that you will if there's 3 women in a meeting. So what we ask our male allies to do is, if there's a woman in the meeting and she makes a good point and it maybe doesn't get the reaction that you think it should, echo it. Pause the meeting and say, you know what, Aoife just made a great point there. Aoife, could you expand on that a little bit as how you think we might apply that? I think to another point that John mentioned there is, women are very good at doing the job. And sometimes they think they'll just keep the head down and do the job, that the rewards will come. Someone will come along and tap you on the shoulder and say, I want to take you to the next level. That's just not going to happen. So we spend a lot of time educating women around the fact that their progression depends on really primarily 3 things: the performance, their brand, and their visibility. And when you ask women, first of all, what % do you think? And they all say, oh, it's got to be performance is the most heavily weighted. It's not. Brand is the second most heavily weighted, but visibility is the most impactful thing about whether or not you're going to get the opportunity for that next role. So we're working a lot on sponsorship right now, because the big decisions about your career are made when you're not in the room. So you need somebody in the room advocating for you. And men have had this for generations because they're very good at networking, and there's established networks through sports or through business. Women traditionally have not been as good. So we're making a big focus on educating women on what they need to do to improve, or to be aware of their brand, have their story, as John says, but also how they make sure that they're visible. And then we're looking to make sure that we have sponsors who understand what these women can bring to the table and advocate for them. So that's really work that I'm excited about. It's kind of the next stage of mentorship. We're getting better all the time at figuring out how to support women and achieve that gender balance, which we need. Diversity drives innovation and great ideas, and that's what everybody wants in their company.
I think it's amazing, Ruth, some of the suggestions you've made there about, advocating people in the meetings, because, as a coach myself, a lot of women will come to me and say, oh, I said this great thing at a meeting and it went down a gaping black hole on the meeting. Nobody picked up on it. Then I felt terrible, and their inner critic is hopping in on things. So things like that we didn't have years ago, it's fantastic to hear that. Gillian, I might come to you to see your thoughts on this, and maybe around, there might be some people on the call today that aren't part of mentorships in the organization, that the organization mightn't have that. So maybe there's people here on the call today that don't have that support system in play. I don't know, Gillian, would you have any thoughts or advice for people like that?
Oh, this is a topic I could talk about for a long time, and Ruth and I have been on a panel before, so I echo everything that she says, and particularly the point about sponsorship. Like, anybody who ever says to me, we don't have mentoring and we don't have sponsorship within our organization, I turn around and I say, you do. It is there. It is part of the culture of every single organization, but in some places it is done really well, and in some places it is done not so well, or it has a bias within it informally that everybody just accepts. I do think there is real value in mentoring up to a certain point. Beyond a certain point, women get over mentored and under sponsored, and that definitely needs to change. But what I would say is, if it doesn't exist within your organization, find a way to look for it outside your organization. I do think sponsorship works better internally. Yeah. Because sponsorship, people have to know you and talk about you. And if sponsorship isn't happening, then actually drive it yourself. Step up outside of your comfort zone. And as Ruth says, and I talk about it as the princess syndrome, don't wait for the tap on the shoulder or the tiara on your head. Go and find your own tiara. Work out who are the people who talk about the people and get yourself introduced. Go and ask somebody to be your mentor, but don't do it in a frightening way. Don't talk about mentorship as if you're going to somebody for the Holy Grail. You just want somebody to have a conversation with, or find a mentor in another organization. So I'm in the strange, some days it's lucky, some days it's strange situation. I have no team now. I have no employees. I have no work colleagues other than lots of volunteers, but I regularly get a phone call from somebody going, here's a great person, they need a mentor, will you be their mentor? And I'm going, I'll have coffee with them. I can't be a mentor to lots of people, but I can have coffee with lots of people. So there will always be people who will connect you with somebody else, or, I'll keep promoting it because it's a great program. Our program in the IMI is designed specifically for people who either don't have a mentoring program in their company, or actually don't want to have a mentor within their own company because they want to be able to talk to a stranger, somebody where they can be open about it. But to come back to the original piece, you know, the question about the McKinsey research about the first rung on the ladder, one of the things that I found reassuring, not very comforting, but reassuring when I came to the 30% Club is that every time I went into a new industry, I found exactly the same pattern. You know, men and women equally balanced at certain points in the pyramid, and then the cliff happens, and the question is, where do all the women go? I think probably the most challenging thing about the McKinsey research that came out last year was that we all assume that it happens at a later point in the career. And it was really interesting to see, no, actually, it is much more fundamental. And if we don't fix it at the lower levels, we're never going to be able to change things at the top, because sometimes it can look like you're making great progress at lower levels, but it's averages. You know, so if I'm in an industry where there's a high percentage of women, they will turn around and go, well, at junior management, we're 50-50. And I'll say, but your industry is 70-30. So 50-50 is not going to fix the next level and the next level. So we're now starting to look at talking to organizations about more fundamental issues. And they are fundamental issues around women in silos that move slower, silos that will run out of road, women not going into sales, as Ruth says, women not going into P&L roles, which slows down their first promotion and then ultimately their later promotions. And then my favorite, advertising opportunities with 10 requirements. And again, I will talk in stereotypes, and John has heard me say this before. We know that if organizations run everything around 10 requirements, a man will put his hand up if he can meet 4, and he will say they will love me when they see me. And a woman won't put her hand up until she can tick all 10. And actually, sometimes we have to be braver. And then also we're now starting to talk about different life stages. And sometimes organizations need to realize that women will step back for a while, but that doesn't mean they've stepped out. And how do we create opportunities for them to step back in when the time is right, and that careers aren't always on the same trajectory for men and women?
Great advice there, Gillian, and I think you've sparked a new movement of t-shirts. Find your own tiara. Love it. I'm going to be using that again, and I will quote your name on it, Gillian. John, we've one question left that I have, and then we're going to go to the questions that come in. So John, I'm going to come to you with this question, and maybe I might get Ruth your views on this, and then we'll move on to the questions that have come in. We're talking about challenge today, and having sufficient challenge is key to keep us engaged in work at the moment. And I don't mean being busy, that's a challenge in its own right, but having challenge. What would be your advice, John, to people in organizations at the moment who feel they have no work-related challenge at the moment?
Yeah, look, I think we call it purpose is really the way we center on this sort of topic. So, you know, an awful lot of focus has gone into organizational purpose in terms of, you know, successful organizations have a clear purpose, and that aligns then throughout the organizations, be it, you know, customer first or whatever the case may be. And I guess, you know, when we reflect on this topic, it's not a great place to be if your own sense of purpose and what you do for 8, 9, 10 hours a day are not aligned, and that tension can be problematic. So I think, you know, people need to maybe just stand back and say, you know, well, you know, the organization that I'm in today, does a purpose align with my purpose? Is there a way in my role that I can see, like, you know, a connection between what I do every day and that organizational purpose? And if I can't connect that, you know, I need to work hard and maybe work with the network or work with my advocates, sponsors, whatever the case may be, to see how I can sort of bring that to the fore. Because, you know, all the research would say from a whole host of different perspectives, be it, you know, mental well-being, your own personal sort of energy, if you don't have that alignment, it's not a great place to be. So the first port of call, I think, is people just to reflect on that, because oftentimes you'll find, have people made the connection between what I do every day, you know, my sense of purpose, is there alignment in that world? And if there's not, I need to maybe rethink and see how I can achieve that. And, you know, ultimately, my own advice would be that, you know, you need to seek out the opportunities to align those things and seek out that purpose and progress your career to an area where what I do for those 10 hours a day is aligned with what, you know, my perspective on life, what I want to get from life, how it fills my life outside of work, and really sort of spend some time thinking about that.
Okay, thank you for that, John. Ruth, anything to build on that?
I think John's answered that really well. I suppose I'd start from, listen, for a lot of people, 2020 was just about surviving it and just, you know, getting through it. And that's fine if you weren't ready to take on a new challenge or a different challenge. But, you know, if that is something you're looking for, I'd look at kind of what you really love within a work context. So what are the things that you really enjoy doing within your job? Because there's going to be some of that, right? There's going to be either you love coaching people or running training sessions or writing business cases or leading projects. Whatever it is, figure out what it is that really gives you the most joy in your job. And then do your research, talk to your manager, look outside of your team. Where could you add value to another part of the business by doing something that you love? And what that's going to do is it's going to give you purpose, to use John's word, which is a great word. It's going to give you visibility into another area of the business where maybe your career could go. And I think Aoife mentioned that earlier. And it will drive you. And it will show your manager as well that you want to take on more. You know, maybe there is more within your own structure. And if you put your hands up and work with your manager and identify, listen, I'm really good at this. I love doing this. I have a bit of space that I can do more of this. Your manager might turn around and say, this is a gift because I have this and I was taking it all on. You often find we're working remotely now. We're not seeing what we're all doing all the time, you know? So I think just have that conversation, be really clear on what you love to do. And yeah, that word around purpose, John, I'm going to steal that. I think that's great.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of input in this as well is strengths, right? If you're using your strengths, you're going to have that as well. And I think there's a lot of that strengths-based coaching stuff coming out now. So if you feel you're not using your strengths, what can you personally do to maximize you using your strengths? And what can you ask your leader to do? So it's always a two-way conversation about you kind of owning that as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the questions now that have come in from people today. I'm going to read out the question and then I'll ask one of the panelists to raise the hand if you'd like to take the question, because they're not actually asking a specific person that, okay? So one of the first questions, really interesting one. What have you learned about managing people as leaders, and what difference, if any, did you apply to how you approach leadership during the pandemic? Who'd like to?
Yeah, I can certainly take that, because as I mentioned, when we first went into working remotely, working from home, Indeed hadn't done that. We didn't have the legacy knowledge of how that worked. We were always an inside sales org. We were together on the sales floor. So I had a lot of anxiety about how I was going to do my own job and how I was going to lead a team of people to do their job. And what I found with regards to my leadership style is that I needed to be just a lot more transparent, a lot more open with my teams. We're in each other's homes, you know, and, you know, there isn't that divide, you know, sometimes between, you know, the work persona and the home persona, because we're in each other's homes and there's pets in the background, or kids or partners or roommates or whatever it might be. And I think one of the things that we had to be was just really open in our communication style. I probably communicated a lot more with my teams. And I was very fortunate. Our senior leadership really came out with a clear message that allowed us all to follow, which was around empathy, which was, this is tough. Our global HR leader said, you know, you're not working from home, you're staying at home during a global pandemic and you're trying to do your job. And that was the statement that came out, you know, a week or two after we'd gone to work from home. And I think that allowed all of us as leaders to kind of really say, okay, this is where we're going as a company. You know, a lot of our business had disappeared. A lot of our clients were in really tough positions, having to furlough staff, businesses that may never open up again. You know, so we really needed to just navigate and help support people through that, and be very aware of how challenging it was going to be for people to work from home. John mentioned a little bit earlier around mental health, and that's certainly something that we've focused on within Indeed. We have a mental health squad, we named it, our MHS, which is rep-led, which is really focused on how we can really support each other, mindfulness, meditation, well-being. I think John talked a lot about well-being as well. And as a leader, I think it was just incumbent on us to be really human in our approach. And I've enjoyed, in a strange way, this journey in leadership that we've had to take in response to the pandemic, because I think we've learned a huge amount about what our teams are really capable of, what our companies are really capable of in a real crisis.
Thank you, Ruth. John, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just a quick one really for me, just on reflection. I think the impact of your leadership style at a time of crisis is really important. So people do look for, clear direction at times. They do look for clear sort of empathy to deal with maybe the circumstances at home that they're dealing with. They're also looking for sort of as a leader, you need to collaborate, because certainly what I found during the crisis was that you don't have all the answers, and as a leader you need to recognize you don't have all the answers, and you need to reach into the wider team to maybe solve for problems. So a reflection I would have over the last 12 months is that leaders have to tap into a range of different styles, and also be very conscious of the impact that they have on sort of the disposition of their team. So if you panic, that definitely feeds down. If you get a sense of, I don't know what I'm doing, that feeds down. So, from a leadership perspective, just to be self-aware around the impact that your disposition has on your teams is something you have to be very conscious of.
Thank you for that. Gillian?
It's interesting. It reminds me of the first time I did some training for agile leadership, and I had quite a young manager on the program, and he said, but Gillian, how can I ever manage my team in an agile way? I need to be able to walk up and down the floor and see who's on Amazon doing their shopping and who's Googling something. And I realized then the problem wasn't his team, the problem was with him, and how was I going to help him? There's always three things that strike me in terms of leading in a more agile way. The first is, people don't wake up of a morning, unless they're very strange individuals, and say, I'm going to do a bad job today. People generally wake up and say, today I'm going to do my job well in the infrastructure that I live in. Two new words for me that I think have come definitely to the fore in terms of leadership in a pandemic. The first is around trust. So you do have to think about how you build trust in a very different way. And the more you trust, the better the relationship will be, and the better the well-being will be. And then the other new word is around outcomes. So as managers, we've been trained traditionally to focus on the inputs. What are people doing? How many hours are they doing? Walking up and down and seeing what's happening. Whereas if we look at it in a more adult way, it's about focusing on the outcome of the time they spend. And when you combine trust and outcomes, it means that your teams can work in a better way. They can work at different times, at different pace. And for some, that means giving much more personal flexibility, but also much more accountability. And I think they are the two words we'll continue to see throughout the pandemic. And hopefully they'll be the two words that will still exist when we move into whatever the new way of working is going to be.
Absolutely, yeah, and trust, I think, is the pillar of everything at the moment. We've another question come in, and again, I'll get you to raise your hand if you'd like to contribute to this. The 4-day week, do you think it's on the horizon? And if it is, it could or would have a positive impact on women in work. Anyone have a thought they'd like to share on that?
I don't know the answer to the question whether it's on the horizon or not. I suppose it's a little bit around what we've all been talking about, though, and it's interesting just touching on the last question, where people possibly were concerned that people were working from home, they would do less. I have found the exact opposite, that people are doing far more than they've probably ever done before when they can have that switch off from the office. I always think that the 4-day, I'm just going to talk personally. I know a lot of people who've taken a 4-day work and ended up doing 6 days and 4 days and 5 days and 4 days. So you have to be very careful of that. And there's just a piece, it's only a view. As I said, I don't have the answer to it, but if it suits you to work 4 days, I bet you would find you could, without having to go and take that 20% pay cut or something like that. So I just think we need to be careful of 4 days and people saying I need to spend more time with the kids or whatever it is they'd like to do, and all of a sudden putting their hand up to their organization and saying I'm going to work 4 days and cutting their pay. Because I often come across people who have done that, but they absolutely end up, and especially I'm going to say it, women, doing 5 and 4 anyway. So not really answering the question, Fiona, but it's just an interesting comment. I just wonder, has this pandemic give us an opportunity to do 4 days if that's what we really want to do, but do it in a different way?
Hey, John?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think Gillian really captured it at the end of her comment there, outcomes. you know, if we focus on outcomes as opposed to the input, so the input being a 5-day week or a 4-day week, if you reverse that and look at sort of an outcomes perspective on work and how they're achieved, and perhaps, you know, giving people the flexibility as to how they deliver those in terms of how they manage their time, how they manage their work time, the personal time, I think we're going to see globally more focus on that and more move to that in terms of how we work and operate. So it struck me the connection there between what Gillian outlined in terms of outcomes and how we achieve those, and really look, 4 or 5 days, they're the inputs. We should maybe focus more on how we get to the outcomes, you know.
We have a couple more questions coming in, so I'm just going to try and get to them all if we can towards the end of the time, and we might get one panelist to answer each of the questions. I know you've all dying to kind of contribute. Gillian, this might fit best with you, but I'll let you be the judge of this. How do you quantify the impact of mentorship programs? And anyone can answer, but I know, Gillian, you do a lot in that. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if anyone wants to hear it, how do you quantify the impact of mentorship programs? It's a hard question.
It is a really hard question, because when you talk to most people, sometimes the advice a mentor gives you, you mightn't actually see the benefit until 20 years time when you're looking back. You know, I think it is important to distinguish between, you know, a mentor, a coach, and a supporter. You know, and I talk about it on the basis of a coach talks at you, a sponsor talks about you, and a mentor talks with you. And who knows the value of the unofficial conversations. What we try to do through our mentoring program is we do talk to the mentees at the beginning of the program, and the program runs for 12 months. And we do ask them to talk about and try and quantify even what has changed in their life in those 12 months. And it is amazing when people come back and they talk about improved confidence, greater understanding of what is on their mind and the challenges. Many of them have gone for opportunities in the 12 months so that we have been able to track that. You know, so they're the things that you can see straight away. But I can also see it when I go into organizations. You can tell an organization that has a mentorship culture, and you can tell an organization that doesn't, because you can feel it in the conversations around education, around secondments, around further development. And that's something that can be tangible and measured through engagement surveys. A lot of companies have a question in their engagement survey, you know, that says, has my manager or somebody in the organization talked to me about my personal aspirations in the last 12 months? And they can be good indicators as well of a good mentorship culture.
And it is a hard thing to quantify. I totally get that. There's not a magic wand that says this is it. It's very intangible, it's very subjective, and it could be a personal impact to that individual that's hard to replay back. I have another question come in. We'll get maybe one person to contribute to this if they feel that they resonate with it. Being International Women's Day, do you feel that Irish companies are good at having diverse leaders that come from different countries, or do you think they're still being too domestic? I'd like to take that one.
I think that the short answer to that is no, we're not good enough. Personally, I think we're still too domestic. I'm not saying it's the same across every organisation, obviously, but I think if I speak on behalf of some of the very large ones, I think we're obviously trying to address it, and we're putting some very pointed initiatives in place to try and challenge ourselves on that. But I would honestly think it's not good enough yet, Fiona. We're a long way off it, so you know we're probably a little bit further ahead on the gender piece as opposed to the diversity piece. But I do think we are really trying to address it and bringing in lots of initiatives to try and address it going forward. So I think we're not there yet in any shape or form, but maybe the others will have a different view.
Okay, and we have another question coming in. I'm conscious of time. There was a question that came in on imposter syndrome, but I think we've actually addressed it because we talked quite a lot about it. So one last question, then we're going to move to close. So whoever would like to take this. What do you think were the turning points in your career that allowed you to be here today? And at this point of your career, who played a key role in those moments beside yourself? Would anyone like to take that one? John, I had a feeling you were going to take that one, John.
Yeah, no, I start. Look, I think, you know, we talk about mentoring, we talk about coaching. Building advocacy in the organisation for you is critical in terms of career. So I think it was Gillian who referenced the difference between coaching and mentoring. But you know, building that network and having advocates who know who you are, what you're about, what you've delivered, what your ambitions are, so that you can be represented when you're not in the room, has been critical for me in my career. And you know, I think that's something that, you know, you need to consciously think about. The other piece that's been critical for me in my career is sort of taking on different challenges, different roles, so that you can build that advocacy and build that network as long as possible. So don't be afraid to bring your learnings in a particular part of the organization to another part of the organization, because you'll always undervalue the value you'll bring from what you know in your existing role to the new role. And at the same time, you're going to a role where you're going to learn a lot more and sort of widen your network. So I think for me, there have been the two things I'd reflect on is that have really helped me in my career.
And I could probably have this discussion for another hour, I think, with everybody here, because there's been so much there. Even I've picked up stuff from this as well. Thank you so much for all those kind of, you know, conversation pieces. I think there's been some immense value here today. I'm going to come to Dorothy next to close the session. So thank you from my own perspective for everything today. So Dorothy, over to you.
Thanks so much, Fiona. And all I can say is, wow, guys, that was superb. It's unusual for me to get text messages during a webinar, but I've got several saying this is just superb, and the tips and the hints and the great advice that you've all shared. So can I just say, absolutely, thank you so much for your time and your insights and the advice. I wish I was 20, 30 years younger and could be taking some of that advice now, but for those lucky enough to be on the webinar, can I absolutely encourage you to take the advice that's been given. We'll have the recording of the webinar hopefully up on the website tomorrow, and I would absolutely encourage people to share it with their colleagues and teams, male and female, because I think there's so much useful information there. It sounds like it's a coincidence, but CCMA are actually launching a mentor program, details of which will be sent out to members this afternoon. It's really a toe in the water, a pilot scheme, but we're really hoping that members who are interested, especially those who are in maybe smaller to medium-sized companies who unfortunately don't have the luxury of an official mentorship program, might like to take part. And we're delighted that many of our board members, some who are on this call today, have agreed to take part as mentors. So keep an eye out for that for anybody in the audience. But can I say thank you so much, Fiona, obviously, for emceeing as always. Fantastic job. To Aoife, to John, to Ruth and to Gillian, and of course to Niamh. In normal times, I think, John, when we had this event before and we were in Teeling's distillery, I was able to give everybody a gift of a bottle of whiskey. Can I just say a gift will be with you at some point, and hopefully it might be that we'll all have dinner together when all these restrictions are lifted. But thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it, and take care to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.